Plant It Well, Chapter 4, is Fixes and Telltales. In other words, how to see that you have a problem, what to do about it. There's more about this at gardenataz.org. So we're on the second page of the third set of outline that we left for you, and there's a link at the beginning of the chat for you to download it. The trouble that happens later are things like poor growth, especially slow growth of the leader.
And flat top.
Flat on the top. We'll show you pictures of this. That's one of the major things you're going to see. Instability, plants that rock back and forth.
Plants that scorch or get chlorosis.
Chlorosis is where the veins are dark and the leaf is light. Scorch is in the middle of summer. Look at the edges of the leaves are all burning.
Mm-hmm.
People say that's dry. It's almost always a root problem. Death. It helps to know ahead of time.
Sometimes it happens.
You also
fast.
see misdiagnosis of problems. People paying large amounts of money for micronutrient treatments, for aeration.
Iron and core aerating.
And maybe the worst thing is that you get disappointment, especially among the younger people. We've talked to a number of 30-somethings who bought houses and feel that they can't plant a tree.
They buy a tree and it dies 5 years later, or it doesn't perform like they were told it was going to do.
Yep. So learn to recognize what it looks like. And remember what Gary Watson says, 80% of all the tree problems start below the ground. All of them. If there's a problem, think about the roots. Don't let anybody come and talk to you about your plant without thinking about the roots. So these 3 Norway maples.
They're Norway maples planted at the same time.
Just like this
beech.
Beautiful beech at an arboretum in Wisconsin.
Tricolor beech we've watched.
Purple leaf beech.
Purple leaf, sorry.
One of our favorite trees. And one year we walked in and went, oh my gosh, why is it so thin? What's going on? We'd never walked underneath it. It was so thick and so wonderful.
Can you see the root that they've already cut?
The horticulturalist had cut and said, but we were afraid to cut it. And we said, cut it.
It's dying.
But this tree is too far gone already. It should have been noticed before then. It's already pinched in at the trunk. It might, maybe. You can never
say never. The plants will
to live. But if there's no flare, look at the base of this Coosa dogwood, one of the oldest in the country. Look at the base of the tree going straight into the ground like a stovepipe. That's trouble. If you don't see a flare, go out and take your trowel and find the flare, because they need the flare. It's important that that flare gets thicker. It gets thicker and it looks like it's raising up because the tree buttress keeps thickening to hold the weight of the tree.
Look, when you have a tree like that, how do you hold the weight without something?
Those are hackberries. They're a couple 100 years old and they got a flare. If it's flat on one side, there's no flare on one side, if the tree's in trouble. See the flat on one side on this tricolor beech? I've been working on this one for a couple of years. It's also got a crack in the trunk from a damaged root down below. Those cracks in the trunk, we were told they're winter damage. And most of the time, that's not the case on a new tree.
Root was cut.
Very flat on one side. That's trouble.
And you'll see it occasionally in nature.
Yeah, sure. It can happen.
And other trees, roots can girdle a tree too.
Yeah, but go out in nature and count 20 trees and look at maybe you see one flat side.
This one.
Yeah. Well, maybe that one. I see more in this one right here.
I see more in that one.
At any rate, go out in your neighborhood and start counting 20 trees and see how many are like that.
And when the leader isn't shooting up above in the side branches on some trees, they aren't supposed to be going up.
Yeah, we got a picture coming
sorry.
up. The leader has to grow faster than the rest of the plant to keep the plant in order. When the leader slows down and the branches start taking over, then you're in trouble. How do you know that? You look at the bald cypress in Gary Heitschuh's book that we showed you in Chapter 1 and see that the branches on the side branches should be horizontal, not turning up to raise the leader. This tree at 20 years old is in trouble. This is a younger dawn redwood. And see that the branches, they're all that rabble at the bottom, all coming straight up. The owner said, why is it so ugly? I said, because the leader is dying back and the side branches are taking over. We dug down underneath that tree. We found 4 girdling roots and released them. Then I came through and cut the branches off Whoops. Well, I guess that's in another presentation that we've got, but it is looking much better.
It is still there and it's looking much better.
But we had to take, you may be able to tell how much of a dish we took out of that mound of soil to get down to the flare that you see there. That flare wasn't there. It was buried. See that this Katsura, which should be pyramidal during its whole youth, is flat on the top. See the flat part?
So we're wondering,
We're worried
did we
about it.
misplant
Did
it?
we miss a girdling root 20 years ago? See the flat in the center of this
Right
Kusa
here.
dogwood? See the dead, if it's already gone to dead, not just flattened out, but gone to dead, it's too late. That's on a Zelkova. And we looked at our 20-year beech and said, uh-oh.
This isn't the leader. This
that's
is a side branch. The
We went,
leader's
oh,
back
no,
in
has
here.
it run into something? Because 20 years ago, we weren't looking as well. 20 years ago and 25 years ago now, when we worked in this garden, we didn't know to look at this tree. This is
Oh, it was
a
smaller
Swamp
then
Oak,
too. But
and
we
it's
didn't know to
flat
look at
across the
this.
top. It should
Yep.
be round. If they're thin, chlorotic, people say, oh, hemlocks just don't grow well here. Nonsense. Hemlocks are native in the Great Lakes. They should be wonderful. If that, but look at the leader. See that the side branches are going up past the
Even
leader?
gonna go past and
And the leader's not growing as much. Get down on your hands and knees and crawl under that tree and find the flare before it's too late. Because these guys, the one on the right is the worst. They all have a girdling root. But see not only the girdling root, but can you see the cage? Too late on these guys. Already rot, already indent on the trunk.
I mean, Janet was pushing on the trunk.
Yeah.
You can't see her finger going, but every one of them,
They didn't die. This is almost 10 years later.
they
but
still
they're
have a
still-
dip in the top,
they're
and they're still struggling. But you could see the worst grew the slowest.
and they're never going to be good trees. General poor growth. This was the holly in the hedge that wasn't growing as well as the others. You take it out, it's still in the pot. Look, it only escaped from one side. You see this everywhere. Arborvitaes are probably the worst. These people, young couple, they did everything right, except they didn't take the tags off the plants.
Well, they could have made it a bed too, but
Yeah.
mainly
They
everything
planted
right.
them right away. They put a soaker hose on to make sure they got water, and yet 80% of the plants died. And this is what we see time and again with arborvitaes. There's branches. It's my picture, not Steve's. He wasn't with me. These branches right here are coming out of the ground.
They're branches. They're
Arborvitaes
branches
don't
coming out of
have
the ground.
branches coming out of the ground. What happens is this. The arborvitae is planted at this level. See the stain on the smaller trunk? It's rotting the trunk down below and causing adventitious roots that girdle the trunk. And it becomes a race, whether the top can grow fast enough, the roots can grow fast enough to support that top, or whether it just keeps dying back. Because those are all adventitious roots that you see there at the bottom. All that little stuff. There's only one flare root trying to work its way out. And that's because arborvitaes, people like them dense and thick, and to make them stand up in a pot, they put them deep in the pot.
They set them down on almost down on the bottom of the pot,
Like
because
that.
otherwise they're so dense they blow right over all the time.
Yeah, like that little juniper I showed you. So see, the trunk is rotted.
That's the flare right here.
That's all it had.
Everything
left
else is
a
adventitious.
branch. Yeah, and some of them are branches.
Yep.
This ginkgo was in the ground 10 years and not growing much at all, at a growth rate
Small
of less
weed.
than an inch.
Yep.
It was suckering. The owner had cut the suckers off, but there, now that
Yeah.
I've dug around it, can you see the suckers coming? And those suckers are a call for help. I dug
Especially
around, found that it was about 5 inches too deep. We took it out of the ground. It also had, see the girdling root wrapped right across the trunk. I said, Matt, while you're here, go dig up that ginkgo, take all that extra soil off, slice the roots at the bottom that are circling around, and reset it with the
Find the
flare where it
flares.
belongs, and cutting those girdling roots off the bottom. Put it back in the ground. Whoops. I guess
I thought we put
the picture in.
it's still there.
It's still there. A deer beat the living daylights out of it this year when we took its picture. 3 years later, it's 10 feet tall. A buck came, but it's still living, that darn thing.
Somehow.
Okay, so what we do is we slice off the entire bottom layer and slice vertically in the side all the way to the plant itself. We slice all the way in, and we bare root everything we can bare root.
Now, something like this one, you might not have to slice the bottom yet, but you'll be able to tell. We did slice it though.
Yep, I put it in the pot of water and swished it around and said, what have I got? Found the trunk, started unwrapping roots. And I did have to cut the bottom.
Look how much, it
was buried all the way in the pot.
Mugo pines don't sit at the ground level. They have a trunk.
Yeah, we used to scoff at people who said, you got to rinse all the soil off the root ball. No, you can't do that. But now that's what we do. Here's a little baby Coosa dogwood. We found that Coosa dogwoods have a tap root. It's running straight down through here. And that if other roots are wrapped around that root, like this one by my thumb, or this one here, they're going to kill it.
It'll strangle the tap root.
Yep, just as certainly as it's strangling the trunk. So we now take a thing like a sassafras, which is a species that supposedly you aren't supposed to disturb the roots. And we cut open the pot, and I loosen the root ball, and I rinse the root ball, and I shake the root ball. And I'm not alone in this. Bonnie Appleton, another of our heroes, Bonnie has now passed away, but she was at Virginia Tech. She said, okay, you nursery people who say we shouldn't let them disturb the root ball, it'll kill the trees, and then we won't be able to guarantee them. Let's see how much disturbance they can handle. So they took red maples and willow oaks, big ones. You can see the gentleman there in the upper left. And they either power washed the roots to clean them off, or they more gently rinsed them off, or they planted them per university standards, or some of them, a quarter of them, they lifted them 12 feet up in a tree spade and dropped them.
Dropped it.
After 2 years of growth, there were no significant differences.
Now maybe
the willow oak in leaf did not like being bare rooted. So we learned about willow oaks, but they can take a lot of disturbance.
One thing, you would have been able to see the girdling roots clearing those out. We didn't hear. So maybe 20 years later, if they're still growing, it'd be interested to see.
Yeah, it would be good to see. So I was going to see a client, and before I got to, well, actually, I think I knocked on the door, and then I looked at her little dwarf dawn redwood, and she came out, and I was already digging it up. What are you doing? She said, I paid a lot of money for that.
That's an expensive plant.
I said, yeah, and it's planted too deep, and look, it's girdling already. I got to fix your tree. So I took it out and cut that root off. Cut it off.
It's
going
to kill your tree.
If it's not flexible enough to bend it outward and peg it to where it can grow radially like it should.
That you could do, if you can do
Not
it.
that one. No,
Not that one. We
cut
can
it
do
off. Okay. This dogwood wasn't growing well. I said, how long has it been there, Edie? 5 years? She said 6. People don't even pay attention after a while. It hasn't bloomed. I said, well, for heaven's sake, it's going straight into the ground. It's got no flare. Let's get it out, rinse it off. See what its problem is? Straight into the ground and totally being strangled by all its adventitious roots. We ripped all those roots off. We put it back in the ground, and it grew 5 inches the next year where it had been growing only 1 inch.
And roots grow.
They do grow. That's 12 days of root growth on a catalpa tree.
12 days.
This is 1 year's growth on a 7 sun.
This one right here. The deer abused it.
The deer beat it up and broke the trunk, and my client said, I don't wait for green bananas, get me another one. So here's one going in the one on the left in the background looked just like this one when we put it in. And I cut the bottom off. I took all the roots off the top. You can see the circling roots that I've got to take off the top on this one. See that girdling root going around?
Here.
Girdling root there.
Coming from somewhere.
This one's flexible enough that I can bend it
So
outward.
you pull it out and then stake it down or get it to stay down.
This one I've already cut. But that's exactly what I did to this one, and look a year later at what it did.
And look how big the leaves are and how green.
Yeah, the buck knocked it down, and I told her to grow back, and it did, but she wouldn't wait.
She was 100 years old. It's understandable.
Yeah, so here's the growth. We had 1 year's growth. Show them the growth rate from
here to here. That's called a terminal bud scar.
And there, it grew 1 inch, and after we did this to it, it grew 5 inches. This little Coosa dogwood, it's a wolf-eyed Coosa dogwood, was planted a shovel deep.
And look how tight that rolled, the foliage almost is rolled up.
Cage was still there, low-rise cage, but the cage was still there. The roots were trapped in it. I was able to bend one root outward and put it back in the ground at the right level. And that's what it looked like in May of the year that I did this to it. That's a year later. See how different the leaves look? They're still not out of the woods.
No, it's still not. recovered yet.
And it still doesn't have, see, it's still dead in the center. The terminal died back a year later. So I moved it again. Now look at it.
Mhm.
See, now it's got a center. And when I moved it again, I found one more root wrapped around the rest of the roots. So we're passing this on to you. You go out and look now. Look in botanical gardens.
Walk around and look at trees, and if they don't quite look right,
With the terminal not growing well, then you're in trouble. You'll find problems at the base. Always look at the base.
there's
Girdling root.
strangling it.
And yes, you can chisel the roots out. Chisel is better than cutting on most of these things.
Chisel is, you have to be skilled.
Terminals died back. Side branches, or even the terminal on each side branch is dying back. And that's what was going on at the base. See the girdling root?
It doesn't take a big root.
No,
to
it doesn't take a big
strangle it.
root. I walked past this one. This is at a botanical garden and said, what the heck? Digging down, looking for the flare, finding the girdling roots. Even little roots are girdling. When you don't have tools, it's sometimes hard. Those are the flare roots trapped down like that willow. Trouble. Can't fix it. Too late. Center's dead, not just flat.
And it has a
Cracks.
split right down.
And you can see the girdle.
That's not a lightning strike.
No. You look at a row of trees, and one of the magnolias has no leader. It's in trouble. Look at a line of trees, and the one that's flat, look at the flat one, you're going to find trouble. Dead in the center. These are in a parking lot. See the suckers? They shouldn't be suckering. Suckering is, see, you can still see the burlap wrapped around that one.
Straight into the ground.
Straight into the ground. Look for these things. Fix them when you see them. Straight into the ground is a problem. Leader is dead on this little maple. No flare, already dead on one side. And these are new trees. They were, I think this is at Plainwell at the township hall.
Yeah, doesn't
And,
take.
right. And they just went in the year before. They're still salvageable.
Straight in.
So you're going to find this. You're going to find the majority of plants, and on your own, save them. On those that you're planting, save them before you put them in the ground.
And if you're planting, get as small as you can based on what your needs are.
Sure, you might want to plant a slightly larger tree so that kids don't run it over with their bicycles, but
Or snap it off as they go by.
this is a ginkgo tree. Ginkgos don't sucker, but this ginkgo is suckering at the base and off the trunk. It's going straight into the ground, and its leader is slowed down. The side branches are trying to take over. You can see it in leaf. You can see it when it's not in leaf. If you're me, you jump off even with people's houses you don't know to say, let me go see what's wrong.
Let me
with
see
that
what's
line.
wrong with that one. Yeah.
Ma'am, what are you doing to my tree? Well, see, I got this trowel. I know how to use it.
Now, see, if she goes out and does that, if I stop and take a picture, somebody asks me what I'm doing, she can jump out and work on a tree, and nobody says a word.
And so there's your air knife or air spade to use to blow the soil away. And on your outline, you have more of the books and authors to look for their journal articles.
Amazing.
Amazing stuff. As far back as the 1930s, when John Weaver was doing this out of University of Nebraska, and the University of Nebraska has put all of his work online. And he didn't do just prairie plants; he did trees and vegetable plants too. So there are studies still going on. I haven't followed up this one yet to find out, because they're trying to figure out if I cut those flare roots, also called buttress roots or first order roots, what happens? The studies are out there. They're doing it. If I leave the wire basket on, what difference does it make? Costs less to put it in with the basket on.
Mm-hmm.
2 to 3 years, we don't see any difference. But tree stability, there was difference.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find information at James Urban's site.
Yep.
2 trees planted at the same time, one of them with its roots pruned, cut,
One not.
and one not.
Look at
same batch of trees. So we are over time, and we're sorry about that. We're 2 minutes over time, but we're glad to stay and handle the questions that are there. So if you have a question and you want to stay for a couple of minutes, we'll see what we can do with those. If not, you can still contact us at our website. You can send to anything at gardenataz.com. confusing. We're gardenatz.org, but our email is .com. You can send to anything. Janet and Steve, Janet, Steve, Tree, doesn't matter. It all comes. There's just the two of us here.
Yep.
So go ahead, Elizabeth. Have you got anything?
I have a couple questions. Yep. The first one is, if there are obvious adventitious roots above the flare roots, do we cut them before we plant the tree?
Most of the time I take all those off. I have, when someone is very nervous, last year one of my clients said, oh, you can't cut those off. I left the roots there and left them as aerial roots. So I planted the tree at the right level and had those roots coming out above ground and just buried their tips. I said, I'm going to leave them there for a year, Cheryl, because they'll do some good for a little while. But these other roots down here are going to do the main thing.
And eventually you do cut those.
Yeah, so it looks like a little spider on the bottom. And if you leave them there, well, then they become kind of a banyan tree, character tree.
Perhaps.
Okay, another question we have is regarding white pines. The Conservation District has a sale. We're selling white pines. They're bare root. They're 4 years, 2 year. Bare root in October. What's the watering regimen for this time of year, and any specifics on white pines with long roots for planting?
That's wonderful. I would love to have some of those white pines. Put them into the ground as soon as you can get them in the ground, because they're going to grow roots until the ground freezes, which is well into December. Water them well, and when you plant them and you water them well, pay attention to how many gallons of water. So that's one of the reasons we use buckets or jugs. Pay attention to how much water it took you to fill the well until the well stopped sucking up the water, and say, okay, so I need to put 4 gallons of water on that. And then we water on a 7-day schedule. The day we plant, we water. Then we wait a day and we water. Then we wait 2 days and we water. Then we wait 3 days and we water until we're watering every week. And then when the ground freezes, we stop watering and we watch it in the spring. Does that answer that question well enough, do you think? Put it in the ground and water it that day. Wait a day, water. Wait 2 days, water. Wait 3 days, water. After you've watered that way for seven times, you're now watering every week.
That's perfect.
And I assume if it's raining, then you don't water that day, if it's a day to water?
Not the case. Not the case. It depends on whether you checked your drainage. Whether it can be moist at the surface and all the water being taken up by trees that already have their adventitious roots in that, their feeder roots into that space. So you need to check, even after a rain, you need to go check and put your hand in under the mulch and find out if it's cool down there. If it's cool, it's moist.
Especially if it's under evergreens.
Yeah.
Evergreens tend to stay very dry underneath.
We have a bunch of high pruned spruces. They have almost no branches on them. We leave them up because the birds like them. And yet they block water from getting to the ground, and their roots are taking water out of the ground. So it can be quite dry under there, even though it's been raining. So check the soil. And in that 7-day watering period, you'll find out. It takes 2 weeks to do that 7 waterings. Mm-hmm. And
you'll know how your soil better is then.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question was, if we've noticed that a tree's been planted too deep, but it's too big to move, should you recommend doing a depression around the tree?
Yep.
To get the soil away, or what would you do?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely make the depression and
make it as wide as you can make it, because you don't want the soil to erode back in around the trunk, and you don't want the mulch to go tumbling down in on it. We moved into our present house 4 years ago, and we have 2 big fir trees. They're probably 80 feet tall, probably almost 50 years old, and they were suffering. They were struggling, and we could see it on the top of the tree, so we started digging. They had been buried when people raised the beds all around.
For some reason, which we can't figure out.
We took 8 inches of soil away from the trunk and sloped it away. And we've done this at a number of clients' houses too, sloped it away to keep it open. And we've seen already almost a doubling in growth rate on the one tree. And on the second tree that was quite flat on the top, we just noticed this year, it's developing a leader again. So even that old, it can make a difference. Yeah.
It can make a difference.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you were here with us today, because this is one of our nearest and dearest to our hearts topics. We want people to have trees and shrubs that make it, that grow wonderfully. And we know that with the way that things are going in nursery production, it's going to be this way for a while. It is the economical way to produce trees, and we just need to tell everyone that we can, here's how to plant, and let's make the world greener with the plants we put out there.
There's a question or that.
Oh dear. We're going to say goodnight formally, but we're going to stay.
Jim has.
Has a question, a problem here, and I think we need to comment on that one too. Go and you can find these things on our website too.
Yeah, check out
lots of articles. Some of our
articles.
Some are there, thousands. Some are there as magazines. For instance, this oak tree with its girdled roots at the bottom, and we showed you what happened. Actually, that one was a sugar maple.
Yep.
Information about those books, about those
Same
bushes that
plants
you take
we've
out.
showed you.
Yeah, and then go out and plant.
Encourage the kids.
Yep.
Get the
Show
kids
them how.
involved.
That red bud was little kids. They learned, and then we'll have big, healthy trees and enduring gardens.
Be our
They'll be
legacy.
So planting white pine seedlings, you say, and you have a tree of heaven, a big tree of heaven. Tree of heaven grows from all of the root pieces that come up, and it is very difficult to kill. I'm assuming that you're treating.
Well, he just says he treated
just the
triclopyr,
right? But you're putting it just on the sucker, I hope, and being very careful not to get it anyplace else. If you can plant your white pine seedlings, if you're certain that you didn't get any of that triclopyr any place on the soil or any place where it can run off into where the seedlings are going to be, because that's a long-lasting, very, very potent thing.
Yeah,
so is tree of heaven, very long-lasting, very potent. It is the bindweed of the tree world in terms of how long those suckers keep coming up. But eventually, you do win out if you keep repeatedly going back and slicing off everything that comes up, including what comes up in the lawn around the area.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's it for the questions. I just wanted to thank you so much, Janet and Stephen, for this wonderful presentation. I want to thank everybody who is here listening and submitting questions and participating. And then also I need to say that this was produced by a grant from the Michigan DNR, Urban and Community Forestry, and it was supported by the USDA Forest Service and the state and private forestry program.
Heroes
Great.
all.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks for putting it together, Elizabeth. And good night, everyone.
Thank you so much.